Responsive Teaching and the Brain. I'm Lauren.
I'm Gabby.
I'm Rachel.
It has 3 sections. The first section is called Building Awareness and Knowledge. So it pretty much just gets us in the frame of reference of what it means to be culturally responsive in our teaching and taking into account the way our brains are wired when we're doing that.
For the second section of the book, it is Building Learning Partnerships, and that's all about making connections with our students, how we can gain their trust, and how their brain works in creating that positive mindset.
And the third section is called Building Intellective Capacity, and it's about how to help your dependent learners become independent learners.
So we hope you enjoy our presentation. So here in the first part of our book, it talks about building awareness and knowledge. And that is in reference, obviously, to how to be a culturally responsive teacher. And the first thing is, what's our number one goal? And obviously our number one goal is supporting our students. And that looks like supporting our students from transitioning from being dependent learners to become independent thinkers. This is something that Rachel's going to get into in a little more depth in her portion of the text. So a couple of the things that are important for building a classroom that does foster this independent thinking is, let's build a classroom that has universal cultural elements. So that means having things from multiple cultures so that no matter who comes into your classroom, your students feel welcome. And then the next thing is, let's make this a safe space both socially and intellectually. So meaning that kids who can be comfortable interacting with their peers and with other teachers and, TAs that come in to the classroom, any push-ins, any pull-outs, being a place that's comfortable and safe for those kids to be. And obviously for their intellectual abilities. You're going to have kids that come in of all different abilities, and some of them are going to be struggling learners, and some of them are going to excel. And so how can we make this a place where that both type of learners are really fostered and really encouraged to learn? And then one of the ways we can do that is to establish routines. So it's important that we have routines in the classroom that foster academic identity and independence. And that can look like students being the ones to get up and get their textbooks, and being the ones responsible for passing out homework assignments and putting them away in a specific folder or box. Chapter 2 of this section gets into one of my favorite portions of the book, and it talks about the different levels of culture that we have. We have surface culture, we have shallow culture, and then we have our deep culture. That surface and shallow culture are the things that we can easily see, like the kind of food we eat, how we dress, what eye contact looks like. Do we look people in the eyes? Do we look away when we interact with them? How do we greet each other? What's our expectations when it comes to time frame? Like, are we always on time, or are we more social in our time orientation? These are all things that are our surface culture. But then our deep culture is the things that actually really make a big difference in our lives, in our day-to-day living. And so that has to do with how we really see the world. What are our schemas, our mental models? It's like these have a big impact on us. So understanding what our deep culture is really important. It helps us to get a grip on what our biases are, because these are things that we're not even thinking about. And so then this helps us to see what are our normative attitudes towards others, and how do we naturally stereotype? And then what's our ingrained shortcuts, the things in our brains that we don't even think about that just happen. And those are part of our culture and the way we see the world. And then when we get into chapter 3, we talk about the brain and how culture has programmed the brain. So it makes more sense why this deep culture is such an influence on how we interact and see the world. And we have both our social and emotional states are impacted by the way our brains are wired to process how we're interacting with things. So we have like pretty much 2 brain motivators, and that they would be minimizing threats and maximizing well-being. And Lauren's going to get a little bit more into how our brain works in her section. But essentially, our brains are designed to move away from threats, obviously, and towards companionship, towards good relationships, things that are healthy and strong. And we're hardwired to connect, which is totally cool. And so as teachers, our priority is to create an environment where students and learners their brains are perceiving that they're in a place that's safe, that they're feeling nurtured, and they feel relaxed. And obviously it's hard to accommodate all those things, but that's where it's important to have that classroom environment that is that represents all cultures in the best way possible, and understanding our own biases so that we can be considerate of the frame of reference our students are coming from. And so that's how we're getting ourselves ready to teach culturally responsibly. So knowing what our cultural reference points is. And actually, one of the handouts we're going to provide for you guys, it gets into some tools to discovering like where we are at when we're going into this, and how we're perceiving the world. It's going to give you some questions to try to work through, and kind of see what's my starting point. And then how does this impact our expectations of students? And this is where we got to think about our deep culture. What's the expectation in the classroom? Just from being in the classroom this week, I can see this teacher's expectation of students in their learning is that they're seated in their desks and they're quiet, they're not being a disturbance to others. And that's a very normative American expectation for learning. And so that's something to be aware of. And then also consider, okay, what's the population of my student body right now? Where are their cultural references of these students? And is this normative from where they're coming from? Is this how students typically learn in their culture? And adapting and realizing, okay, let's make sure we're doing something that's going to meet the students where they're at and really foster a place where they can learn and not just sit still, but actually get something out of it. So that's what I took out from the first part. And next, you're going to hear from Lauren, and it's going to be great.
The second section of our book is building learning partnerships. So these chapters are all about building relationships and making connections with our students. It's not much of a surprise, but the brain feels most relaxed and safest when we are connected to others that we trust to treat us well. So we need to build these positive relationships with our students. They need to feel that they can trust us. We need to show them as teachers that we care about them emotionally and physically. If the students don't feel this way, they're less likely to trust us, which means it will make it a lot harder for them to then learn from us. And it's really unfortunate, but studies have shown that a lot of students feel that there is a disconnect between them and the schools and them and their teachers. And this is especially across racial, ethnic, and socioeconomical lines. So we really need to try towards closing that disconnect to help them. And so trust begins with listening to our students, show them that we respect them, we care for them. And so we're actually going to do our activity is going to be about trust generators. So we're going to be brainstorming ways that we can build relationships and make these connections with our students. So we need to be an ally to our students. We need to make an alliance with them, show them that we are right there with them. We are on their side. If you don't know an alliance, it is a shared agreement and understanding to tackle a specific goal. There must be a shared understanding about the steps needed to achieve that goal, and there needs to be a mutual bond of trust between the people in that alliance. And so we need to build the capacity to have a shoulder-to-shoulder relationship with our students. We are on the same level as them. We are on their side. So next we're going to talk about mindsets, and then we're going to talk about how the brain works. So there's a few different components of the academic mindset. That is that the student feels that they belong to that academic community, They feel that they can succeed at what they're doing. They feel that their ability and competence will grow with their effort, and that the work has value to them. If they don't feel those things, then they're going to be a lot less likely to care and be involved and do them. So students that have negative mindsets are more likely to act out or zone out in class, and that's because that's their response to their internal belief that they can't be successful. This does not mean that they are bad kids. It doesn't mean that they're not trying to learn. They feel internally in their brain that they cannot. They don't think that they have the capacity to learn those things. So as teachers, it is our job to try and change that mindset, to show them that they can learn, they can do these things. And so there's a term, learned helplessness, and that's when students believe that they have no control over their ability to improve as a learner, which is false. So that's really something that we need to work at, showing them that that is not true. Okay, so now the brain. So bear with me, I know it's a lot, but I'll try and explain it all. So our brain scans information that's stored in the hippocampus. It's like our personal Wikipedia pages of the brain. And so our brain recognizes patterns over time that are related to our sense of competency, self-efficacy, and our ability to grow as a learner. And it is important to note that so negative events that happen to us, we are 3 times more likely to remember those and have those ingrained in our brain than the positive things that happen to us. So at a certain point, our brain believes that these same patterns will continue, whether they are good or bad. We think that they will continue. So this creates a stigma, which is like a software program to run on autopilot. And so the hippocampus then feeds information to the thalamus and the amygdala. So the thalamus is like the brain's air traffic controller, and the amygdala is all about our emotions. It's like our brain's guard dog, trying to protect us. And so the brain has a script that's coded into its safety threat system, which will instruct us to either avoid or embrace particular learning situations. And so the brain chooses to interpret and encode this information results in either a fixed mindset or a growth mindset, meaning if they are willing to take a risk and a chance or if they are not. And this is something we've talked about in Dr. Driscoll's previous classes. So that's all I have. So now we're going to move on to Rachel for her to talk about the third section.
Thanks, Lauren. Part 3 of Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain is called Building Intellective Capacity. The chapters in this portion are Information Processing to Build Intellective Capacity and Creating a Culturally Responsive Community for Learning. The goals of this chapter and of culturally responsive teaching, as we've learned so far, are building intellective capacity, helping students acquire active processing, and making dependent learners into independent learners. You can only get to this point after you've already created a relationship of rapport with your students. In the previous section, when Lauren was speaking, this was called a warm demander relationship. Teachers with rapport relationships can push the students beyond their comfort zone into their ZPD, or their zone of proximal development, and comfort and support the students when they're challenged by their zone of proximal development. Our brains are subconsciously scanning our environment for threat signals or for familiarity. If students are experiencing microaggressions in your classroom, then they're going to feel that the environment is threatening, not welcoming. On the other hand, if students notice familiarity, things from their culture in your classroom, then they're more likely to feel safe and welcome in your classroom. When students feel safe mentally, physically, and emotionally, then a condition called relaxed alertness is created. The students are ready to learn and they're not stressed by their environment. Ways to promote familiarity in your classroom include showcasing parent artwork in a rotating display, or including textiles that are important in objects around your classroom. Once your students have gained relaxed alertness, then you can focus on the next portion of culturally responsive teaching, turning your dependent learners into independent learners. In order to turn dependent learners into independent learners, We need to teach them how to actively process the information they are intaking. Active processing is made up of 3 parts: input, or taking in knowledge, elaboration, or connecting new knowledge to background knowledge, and application, the ability to store knowledge in your brain for easy retrieval when it's needed later. The instructional strategy that is used to put active processing into place in your classroom is called Ignite, Chunk, Chew, Review. In the Ignite portion of this strategy, you're getting the brain's attention, letting it know that it's time to learn. You can do this with call-and responses like 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, 1, 2, eyes on you, or other strategies. This gives the brain a signal to switch into learning mode. Over time, you'll have to focus less on getting your students to switch from one activity to another and more on deeper instruction. This is because, over time, these routines will become automatic for your students. The chunk portion of this strategy focuses on making information digestible. This means not overloading your students. There's only so much their brains can take in before they need time to process. So, give them a chunk of information, then allow time to process. Then another chunk of information, then time to process. The chew portion of this strategy is the processing time. Active processing. Students can take in new information for 12 to 20 minutes. Then, they need 5 to 10 minutes to process the information. Processing the information looks like thinking or talking about what they've just learned, and if there's anything that they're struggling to understand. Finally, the review portion is having a chance to apply what they've learned. Reviewing information they've just learned solidifies the neural pathways. This is where the phrase, use it or lose it, comes from. Students should review the material they've just learned within 24 hours, and then in timed intervals throughout the week, as this increases retention. All of these tools and strategies will help you to make your classroom more culturally responsive.
So we're going to just share with you some of our takeaways from this. We hope you guys got a lot out of this. We definitely did from reading our book. For me, my biggest takeaway was that it's important for us to know our own cultures and be aware of the biases that come with that, so that we can kind of check ourselves as we interact with students and be considerate of what frame of reference they're coming from.
And building off of what Gabby said, we really need to gain that trust of our students, because if they don't trust us, then it's going to be so much harder for them to learn from us. So we really need to make sure we're working towards building those relationships.
And then doing both of those things, we can move on towards actually helping our students work to be independent learners and gain the knowledge that they've been, working to gain.
Thank you. Have a great day.